Okay, what does the Royal Ballet School in London, the Scientific Method, the Journal of American History, and Elon Musk all have in common? They're all custodians of knowledge. And no, they all take themselves more seriously than a cat watching a laser pointer. Okay, that's a stupid joke and it's superficial and it's a spurious beginning to this video. But I like spurious things, because I think that spurious things are a way in. They're a way of getting everybody to start to understand some of the issues, and they reduce the stress and the tension, which is what we're all about on ToK today. We will get less spurious and more serious. But before I do that, let me just tell you that if you want the free overview notes of this video, then stay watching to the end. I'll tell you how you can get them at the end. And if you want serious, detailed, long notes which have real life examples and knowledge arguments and evaluation implication points to help you with this essay title, then hit the link in the video description to take you over to toktoday.com. Let's get less spurious, less superficial, and more ToK serious. Now, if you're considering whether we need custodians of knowledge, you have two big questions to consider. What are custodians of knowledge, and what purpose do they serve? That is, what needs might they be fulfilling? Let's take them in turn. Like all of these ToK concepts, there are many possible definitions of custodians of knowledge. Broadly, custodians of knowledge can be thought of as institutions, bodies, or journals that act as gatekeepers, such as the Royal Ballet School or the Institutional Review Board. Secondly, custodians of knowledge could be the conventional or legitimate methodologies and practices to producing knowledge, like the scientific method, or the accepted positions in ballet. Next, we may want to think of custodians of knowledge as the historical context, culture, or values of an area of knowledge. This would include the implicit and explicit ethical codes of an area of knowledge. Finally, we could think of custodians of knowledge as being the purposes of knowledge that act as a functional filter on the utility of knowledge. Of course, there are other ways of defining custodians of knowledge, but these will suffice for our video. Let's move on to think about the needs that these custodians of knowledge might fulfill. We're going to start with a very broad two-part division here. On the one hand, we have needs that are ostensibly good, and then on the other hand, we have needs that are ostensibly not so good. I say ostensibly because as we dig down into this, we're going to see that what initially looks good may not actually be so good, and that which initially looks not so good may actually turn out to be very good. And of course, all of that depends on how you define good. Okay, very good. In terms of the ostensibly good things that custodians of knowledge do, we could include: they protect functionally positive pre-existing knowledge from distortion, misinterpretation, and misrepresentation. For example, scientific research and theory as written in a core scientific journal, such as the British Medical Journal, is the de facto original and correct version. Any other versions are subordinate versions to the official primary publication. As such, custodians, in the role of gatekeepers, can be seen as protecting the integrity of knowledge. This is particularly important if that knowledge relates to things such as safety or identity, and we can link ToK concepts such as power, truth, and culture here. Custodians define and protect the ways in which knowledge is made in a discipline by describing and in some cases prescribing the methods and tools of a discipline. For example, the internationally recognized ballet schools both define the legitimate moves and positions that constitute ballet. They accredit and authorize those who know these positions through ballet exams and the ballet certification. Stronger examples could be developed in the natural sciences, in which scientific research is scrutinized for the use of the scientific method in peer-reviewed journals. Similarly to the protection of pre-existing knowledge, we could argue that the protection of the methodology of knowledge production is particularly important in instances of safety and identity. Custodians of knowledge protect the ethics of knowledge and knowledge production in a discipline. These ethical codes are most clear in the human and natural sciences, in which the ethical codes are explicitly described and they must be ascribed to by custodians such as university departments, regulatory bodies, and peer journals. An example of this is the British Psychological Society, that publishes the ethical code for psychological research undertaken in the United Kingdom. It accredits academic degrees in psychology in the UK that follow the code and psychological research published in the academic journals, and is evaluated in terms of its adherence to the code. The link between custodians of knowledge and ethical codes could be seen as one of mutual inclusivity. In many areas of knowledge, the ethical code can, to a great extent, define the custodian of knowledge, and vice versa. For example, without the Hippocratic Oath, we wouldn't have the practice of modern medicine, as defined by the state medical licensing boards in the US. But without the state medical licensing boards, we wouldn't have the universal ascription to the Hippocratic Oath by medical doctors. However, the ethical codes can also be seen as custodians of knowledge in themselves. Not only do they protect the people to whom knowledge is applied, for example patients, but the people who are applying knowledge, for example doctors, the people who produce knowledge, for example medical researchers, but they also protect the discipline itself. Let's go back to our medical example. If there were no medical ethical codes, we would run the risk of anyone practicing medicine in any way they wanted. Trust in scientific medicine would then break down and could be replaced by other forms of knowledge. So we could argue that the ethical codes protect the area of knowledge itself, and as such could be considered to be a custodian of knowledge in itself. Okay, let's have a look at some of the other points of view that could be developed as evaluation points, or even counterclaims if you're into that sort of thing. Each of the positives of custodians of knowledge also has certain drawbacks, and these are the ostensibly not so good effects of custodians of knowledge. The first big issue is that custodians of knowledge can act as barriers or obstacles to new knowledge, innovation, and even evolution of the area of knowledge. Custodians acting as gatekeepers can decide to keep the gates shut to new knowledge, unconventional knowledge, or knowledge that has been produced using unconventional methodologies. Many of you will know the story of how the Impressionist artists were excluded from the art salons of Paris in the early to mid-1800s. The artistic style, content, and intention was not deemed to be serious nor proper art. Very similar discussions are happening today with AI-generated art. In the human sciences, we can see similar processes happening at the inception of psychoanalysis, behavioral economics, symbolic interactionism, and so on. The obstruction or exclusion of new knowledge, innovative knowledge, and hybrid knowledge can render pre-existing knowledge as out of touch with changes in the external environment. It can make pre-existing knowledge ineffective, or even worse, it can make it dysfunctional. A little personal example comes from my career in teaching. When I started teaching during the Jurassic period, we wanted our students to have experience of these newfangled things called computers. But computers were expensive, so we could never get enough of them in our school. Nowadays, virtually every student carries a very powerful computer in their pocket. But I hear teachers, custodial gatekeepers, saying that students should not be allowed to use them in class. Even though smartphones are an essential tool in everyday life, arguably the custodians of knowledge of how to learn have fallen behind changes in the external world. Okay, let's move on because this is in danger of getting spurious again. But let's stay with technology. Custodians of knowledge can prevent the use of new forms of technology in the production of knowledge, which again can reduce the effectiveness of pre-existing knowledge and limit the innovation of new knowledge. Again, there's lots of opportunity for rich discussion around the role of artificial intelligence here. Students in the class of 24 will have working lives characterized by the development, use, and application of artificial intelligence. I recently saw a great meme that said, "You won't be replaced by AI, you will be replaced by a person who knows how to use AI." Finally, in this brief overview of the potential drawbacks of custodians of knowledge, we can look at the argument that custodians of knowledge can turn areas of knowledge or disciplines into self-serving bodies, functioning only to serve their own continued existence. Let's look at a hypothetical example. A museum may exist to preserve and display artifacts from a particular time and place. Over a period of time, people start to question the purpose of the museum. As a consequence, visitor numbers reduce, the museum puts up its prices so that it can pay its bills, and visitor numbers drop even further. The museum decides that it can no longer afford to display artifacts to the public, but with its government grant, it can just about afford to keep up the collection of artifacts, but it will have to keep its doors shut. The public then start campaigning to withdraw the museum's public grant, and you can see where this is going. The museum, as a custodian of knowledge, no longer exists to preserve and display artifacts, but now exists only to maintain its own existence. Now, I give this as a hypothetical example because I think it's possibly too rude to name real examples in this short video of institutions that only exist to preserve their own existence. But I can think of examples from across all areas of knowledge in which the custodian of knowledge has morphed into a self-serving organisation which exists only to maintain its own existence. The amazing sociologist Irving Goffman said that the ultimate function of all institutions becomes the preservation of the institution itself. When we talk about institutions here, we can think of them as being custodians of knowledge. Okay, let's have some real fun and develop some counterpoints to the counterpoints. We can ask the question of whether these not so good effects are really not so good after all. Maybe we don't want innovation that would undermine effective knowledge. Isn't it better that the innovative new knowledge can sit alongside pre-existing effective knowledge? And anyway, who's to say whether knowledge is effective or not? Just because knowledge doesn't seem to be the latest or necessarily the most popular knowledge of the day doesn't mean that it's ineffective. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't be protected in some way, and doesn't mean that it shouldn't be preserved. Which neatly brings me to the story of windmills and water wheels. For thousands of years, windmills and water wheels were the ways of generating power in the vast majority of societies. And then with industrialization at the beginning of the 19th century, we started to use fossil fuels, and windmills and water wheels became ineffective knowledge. Today, with our concern about climate change and the need for renewable green energy sources, we've gone back to windmills and water wheels in the form of hydroelectric power. What if we hadn't had custodians of physics and engineering knowledge to protect and preserve our old knowledge of windmills and water wheels just when we need to use it again in the 21st century? So, do we need custodians of knowledge? Well, it depends on who you are. Are you the knowledge producer, the knower, the innovator, etc.? What are you trying to do? Why are you trying to do it? The context within which you're doing it, and who you're doing it with. And if you want free download overview notes, then see the link in the video description. But if you want more detailed knowledge arguments, real life examples, evaluation, implication points, then pick up the detailed essay notes over at ToKtoday.com. Well, I hope that you found this overview useful, and if you did, then I'd really appreciate a like, and I'd be incredibly grateful if you would consider subscribing to ToK Today so that you keep up to date with all the latest ToK goodies that I have for you. For more help and lots of resources, please go over to ToKtoday.com. Thank you so much for watching, and stay ToKtastic, my friends. Bye.